Thank you, so many of you, for staying for this evening's post-show discussion. My name's David Byrne. I'm Artistic Director here at the Royal Court, and I'm delighted to introduce you to the writer of the play that you've hopefully all enjoyed this evening, Mark Rosenblatt. So Mark, this is your very first play. Mark had a very successful career as a director, and you've now written this. So what made you start writing, and why this play first?
I have told this story to people before, so if you've heard this, I'm sorry. I hadn't written a play, and I hadn't really any ambition to write a play. I didn't really think I had a play in me, and I had worked as a theatre director for so long that the idea of doing anything other than directing other people's plays seemed alien, really. And the people that I worked with and the people that I came to see on this stage seemed to me sort of beyond my reach, which was, to hold attention, to play with ideas, to make people laugh, to have the confidence of some vision that they had to tell a story for an hour, 2 hours. It just didn't seem to be in my wheelhouse. But in about 2018, I first kind of something I thought would be interesting to explore on stage, which was how we could prize apart the difference between meaningful and constructive conversations around Israel-Palestine, which is so complicated, and I'd noticed that around that time, a lot of, in the public discourse around Israel-Palestine, a lot of blurring with sort of anti-Semitic, often quite medieval anti-Semitic stereotyping. And I thought, how do we dramatize that? And I loved Roald Dahl growing up. I loved his stories, but I somehow remembered in my mind that he had been accused of anti-Semitism, and when I looked to sort of find a proxy story, I dipped into just purely into his Wikipedia page, and there it was, this incident around this article that he wrote in 1983, and I thought, well, I read the article, and it seemed to me to be a version of that kind of blurring. So I just had this idea, and I didn't know what to do with it because I wasn't a writer. And I ended up having a coffee with Nick Heitner, who directed this show, and who I had worked for at the National Theatre for a couple of years when he was running the place. As directors do, you try to find producers, you try to find a way of getting an idea to happen. I wondered if he might help me find a writer, if he liked the idea. And he said to me, "Why don't you write it?" And I said, "But I've never written a play before." And he said, "But you talk so, persuasively about it. I think you know this world, you know these people. Why don't you have a go?" And that sort of began a crazy journey to sort of become the kind of to put on the coat of a writer and try to work out how to shape a story. And it sort of coincided with lockdown, where there wasn't anything else to do, and the promise of at least Nick Heitner being on the other end of being on the receiving end of the script when I had finished it was incredibly encouraging. I mean, he's such a major figure in our industry, and he doesn't mess people around. So I with idea. Is that? And so I started the process of writing it, but it was really, it was really hard. And the treatment that I wrote for him, it's funny because the first half of the treatment, the treatment is like an outline of the story that you're proposing to work on, and it's a couple of pages. But the first half of it was a version of the play that you saw tonight. The second half of it was it was going to be the first, but up to the interval was going to be the publishers trying to persuade him to apologise, and the second half was going to jump a few days later, and a whole new set of characters in the room with Roald, a Jewish girl and her mum, and a tea party, and everyone seemed to think it was a good idea at the time. But when I finally started working on it, about a year and a half into writing it, I'd so kind of invested in these characters and found reasons for them to be in the room, and found backstory that I sort of thought, I don't know how to get rid of them at the interval. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I was getting panicked because it was just getting longer and longer this first half, and I was going to be a very long night, and I still hadn't got to the little Jewish girl and her mum. And I sort of, about a year and a half in, I realised that this little Jewish girl and her mum had to go. And I had to stick in the room with these people. And it turns out that that's often a kind of good thing. You know, you stick with what you've got and you just see it through to the bitter end. And I realised in that treatment, so stupid, of course, that it was going to be somehow in the interval that we were going to assume that Roald had doubled down and spoken to the New Statesman, and then we were going to jump 3 days later and backfill all of that. And it was just like, what am I doing? We've got to see this on stage. We've got to see this telephone call. This has all got to happen before our eyes. And so, you know, it took me, I was slow on the uptake, but I got there in the end.
Yeah. So Dahl in the play is a complex, very layered character. Having seen the play now about 5 or 6 times, you know, he's still very slippery to try and work out where his thought process is going. He jumps all over the place. How did you go about writing those characters in the play that were based on real people? And did your first instincts when you started writing about those characters change and evolve once you started researching and looking into them as real people?
I mean, Roald is I think he's really, sort of on a fundamental level, he is furious, and to me anyway, and absolutely sure of his position, and knows what he's up against from his point of view. So everything he does is about managing that, is about knowing that he knows who the enemy is. He knows he's got an incredibly deep wounds about who this enemy is, and he's extremely agile and deliberate and predatorial. So he can see when in his very front room is someone, particularly Jessie, who he knows what they represent, he knows what an obstacle she is, and he knows that he can enjoy playing with her. And I think that, so some of the slipperiness is that. Some of the slipperiness is also that he's also a complicated person who has very, very genuine, compassionate positions and views and griefs and traumas that collide with cruelty and quite manipulative tendencies. So I guess to make someone feel, I mean, people constantly, we all do. We none of us are sort of mono. And that's as true for him as it's true for any of us. And it would have been boring and impossible to sustain if he had been just one thing. The
most common comment I get people coming out of the interview is they say, well, actually, on a lot of things, I really agree with him. Mm-hmm. I'm really behind him. I'm really there.
Yeah.
And it's rare. I think we're so used to seeing in drama people that are all one thing. Whereas in life, it's not like that. Yeah,
absolutely. Politically, he has things to say that, you know, and exactly. And it's yes, as you say, he takes a very clear moral stance on things. What was the other question? The bit of the question.
So, how did your view on these characters shift and change as you researched them and as you started to, I suppose, get into the mindset of these people? Because actually, there are quite a few real characters in the play. There's also Tom Maschler, the publisher. There's Dahl himself. There's Wally. You know, there's a whole range of people.
Yeah, Lissy is real. I mean, the only truly invented person is Jessie Stone. I mean,
Was it different writing Jessie as an invented character than writing the characters that felt like they had a place in real life?
I was freer to write her, definitely. But in a way, it was harder because I had to invent her, you know. And actually, Tom and Roald and Lissy are people who I could draw from the amazing research that biographers have done. You know, you can pull brilliant circumstantial detail to start to shape who they are. I mean, Lissy was at this time absolutely doing up this house. She was running her own business. She was a formidable business person and creative person, and she had just moved in, and Patricia Neal, his first wife, had just moved out. And so many of these details were things that I was just gifted to play with, whereas Jessie, I had to build from nothing. And yeah, I don't really know where some of the stuff came from. I guess I set out to always find balance and always make it hard to know who to side with. And I suppose Jessie's backstory, her story of having a disabled child, was about finding some commonality between, like the Roald and her. Finding a shared ground that was deep and very, very painful, and yet still they could tussle and clash. It was funny because she wasn't going to be in the play at all originally, because I got my research wrong, and in that treatment I was talking about, it was going to be another bloke, and he was Robert Gottlieb, who was Roald's editor and publisher at Knopf, and I hadn't realised that he had already left Knopf, as we just sort of cover in the play. Robert Gottlieb was one of the greatest editors of all time. I was really into him. He's the most, if you know him, he's the most extraordinary character figure in American fiction editing. He edited everything. It was like a Hall of Fame editor. He edited Catch-22. He invented the phrase Catch-22 because it was originally called Catch-18. And unfortunately, a book by Leon Uris called Mila 18 was being published in the same publishing season, and they realized they couldn't call it Catch-18. And Robert Bob Gottlieb said he was in the shower one day and he said, "I know, Catch-22." and he was just a prodigious force. But yeah, then I'm so grateful for that glitch in my research, because it opened up an opportunity to not have another guy in the room, but yeah, to invent an antagonist who I could push to the nth degree.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. So start having a think about anything you might want to ask Mark. We should stop to say a word from our sponsors, which is corduroy jackets. We're very stylish morning. Available in the foyer after the talk. Yeah, shackets, that's what they're called. So the characters in your play grapple with some of the biggest conversations that I think we're having as a society at the moment, including Israel and Palestine. Can we separate the art from the artist? I know from the work that we did together developing the play that it is so delicately woven together, and each line was so deeply considered. Can you talk about the process of writing the arguments in the play? How you brought those to the stage? And I suppose what you're hoping at the end of seeing the play audiences are left with?
I mean, obviously writing about Israel-Palestine is very, very complicated, and it took a lot of split-headedness, because you've got to dig deep and write both sides, or more than, to assume there's only two sides. And it was very important to me that it wasn't easy to dismiss Roald, because otherwise, what have you got left? What kind of play do you have? Before the cat's out the bag in Act 1, it's sort of fun and painful and fun to have him poking and prodding and goading her. And once the cat is out the bag and Jessie really goes for the jugular and starts to build and build towards the end of Act 1, that was the hardest scene. The hardest scene I've ever written in my very short playwriting career.
The hardest scene in this play?
In this play, which is this play. Yeah, exactly. I rewrote that so many times. I mean, weeks it took. Like, every single time I'd sit there for like 3 weeks trying to read, because it's just how. And it never. We had a read through on the first day rehearsals on this stage, and I just knew it wasn't. Even then, it wasn't. It was too long. I thought I'd really nailed it for that first day rehearsals draft. I really thought I'd got it. And then you listen to it, and it was so complicated. And actually, in the end, on the bank holiday weekend that we just had in August, the first weekend of rehearsals, Nick just said, right, because we did a lot of cutting in the first week of rehearsals, and he said, look, you're going to have to go at it again. I was like, oh no. And I had 3 days in the shed in the garden, just tearing my hair out again, trying to rewrite this bloody scene. And it got to like bank holiday Monday at 10 p.m. and I thought it was in tatters, and somehow it just clicked together. And what was weird was that it clicked together 4 pages shorter than it had ever been, and it was much clearer. And I think I was just inevitably trying to say too much. There's so much to say. There's so many positions that people take around when they're arguing around this, and there's so much whataboutery, and there's so much, well, if you say that, I'll say that, and you just go off on these endless sort of tributaries and of arguments. So it was very, somehow it clicked, and but it was really hard to do and to find the balance. I mean, in terms of like art, separating the art from the artist and cancel culture things, I never really was consciously thinking about it as a kind of cancel culture play at all. I think it sort of, in a funny way, accidentally arrived there because there was so much more to cover once the cat was out of the bag at the end of Act 1. I don't know really. I don't really know. I don't have much objectivity about it. I wasn't consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to write a cancel culture play. That's where it goes. I mean, it's a play about whether a man should apologise publicly, and I guess that is absolutely what happens in cancel culture. But I was determined not to arrive at any answers because I don't have them.
We're going to open up the floor to questions. As I say, I'm going to cluster some questions together and then put them to Mark. Should we start with that question? How do we arrive on the final phone call?
Well, like I said, I realised because I put it in the interval off stage originally in my first sort of iteration of it, I realised, of course, that's what we need to see. We have to see him double down.
Is it worth saying that's true?
The article, the words he uses in that phone call are about 85% verbatim. It's an interview. It's an amalgamation of the interview he gave to Mike Corrin, who is a real person who I interviewed and used his as another source of his kind of an article that he wrote about the interview. So it's that plus Roald did an interview in 1990, the year he died, with Brian Appleyard in the Independent on Sunday, I think, in which he said some of the stuff about being an anti-Semite, and then there's one more source. So I mean, it felt like we needed that. We just needed it to sort of to give him his endpoint, his closure, his decision, his solution to the question that was being asked of him all afternoon, which was, are you going to apologise?
And where do you sit with Dahl's work now? You said you were a big fan when you were a child.
Yeah, I still am. I was reading the twits to my son, who's 5, after rehearsals, and actually, I think I was sort of finding myself going home and reading. I love them. They're brilliant to read, and my son loves them. And we haven't got to George's Marvellous Medicine yet because the illustrations are a little bit twisted, a bit too twisted, and although I do go into the room and find him looking at them, sort of waiting for the chance to look at to read it. But I love them, and that's important. I mean, I didn't write this as a hatchet job. I never intended to sort of smash the Roald Dahl piñata on stage. I just wanted to explore who he was and why he said the things he said. And, well, as I said to you earlier, I didn't set out to write a play about Roald Dahl at all. I wanted to explore something else, and he became a kind of proxy story, which meant that I had a distance from it. I wasn't sort of just like, busting to take him down. And he's a masterful storyteller. I mean, there's problems with the books, I think, in terms of, there are things I edit when I read them. Like, I do think that he associates how people look with their morality, which is incredibly tricky and definitely not something you want to read to your 5-year-old. So I make changes as I read it. But he's a brilliant storyteller, and it's borne out by my son who wants it again, and we're 8 times through the twits. It always feels a bit like a little bit of a leading question.
Did you plant that question?
No. I mean, I did watch tonight. There are things that I would tease out a little bit more, but I won't tell you what they are.
Let's see the next. Okay, so we've got What Happened to Jessie? Hallie. We had starting out in playwriting and sort of advice. what about making that character female, and what that does to it? And I've forgotten your question, which was motivation at the end.
Hallie, I tried to chart a story through. Hallie is doesn't get as much airtime as the other characters, but I wanted everyone to have a journey, and I thought that this endless hectoring by Roald of Hallie to sort of speak her mind, stop deflecting, have an opinion, know the answer, felt like an important question to be asked of a character in a play where everyone is trying to find the answer. And she's the only person, in some ways, I think the only person who says, I don't know, it's complicated. And what I think Roald does in the phone call is tries to prove to her that it's good to not be nice, and to speak your mind. It's like he's teaching a lesson. I mean, there's something bedded in the play which I don't know, some people may find, and it's not essential that you did or didn't find, but there's a sort of moment where, just before Hallie comes in, after the Wally, the gardener, leaves, where there's a kind of a conjuring of the memory of his daughter Olivia, who would be 28, and Hallie he then quickly asks her, how old are you? And he realizes that she's quite close in age to his daughter. And I think he's looking for, it's almost as if, in my mind at least, he's almost as if he's imagining somehow that he can talk to his daughter in that moment and get some guidance. So he's sort of drawing her in, he's trying to teach a lesson, he's trying to guide his late daughter in some ways, he's trying to guide this young woman who's been living in their home and is about to set off on her way. And he clearly oversteps, he says some very extreme things, and Hallie doesn't like it. And I think she disappears. It's a quiet moment of protest. I don't know where she's gone. She's not behind the wall smoking, and she's not in the drive. She's not in the kitchen. So I don't know where she's gone. I don't know whether she's gone for good. I don't know if she's packing her bags. But I intend it as a moment of protest, I guess. She's finally